Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Big day for me, people. Jack Curry, author and Yankees analyst, joins us to talk his new book, The 1998 Yankees, which is the greatest team of all time. Before you say, I don't like baseball, I'm skipping this episode, don't do that, dear listener. Don't. This book is more about a team, how they came together, and we talk about just some really funny stories. You do not have to be a baseball fan to enjoy this book. Trust me. Had a fantastic time talking to Jack. He was very forthright. He had some stories of his own that, I was just completely nerding out. I know I'm a nerd 24/7, but I really nerded out on this one. I'm sure producer Mike is going to make sure that I sound as nerdy as I possibly can. That's just what he does. So listen, there's a lot for everyone here. Even if you're not a baseball fan, please listen to this one. It was a lot of fun. It was so fun. I'm going to shut up and stop trying to sell it. Let's bring Jack on. And here we are, author Jack Curry, the 1998 Yankees. Jack, thank you so much for coming on.
Brendan, it's my pleasure. Good to see you and good to speak with you.
Now, first question, let's just do a little background for everybody. You grew up in Jersey City. You didn't come up in one of those families, those unfortunate families that were Mets fans, right? You started out as a Yankee fan?
Well, I have to be 100% honest with all my answers. So I was born in 1964. I have a brother who was born in 1962. When I started liking baseball, my older brother, which team is he going to like? The Mets just won the World Series in 1969. I followed my older brother and started liking the Mets. So I was a passionate baseball fan, though, Brendan. If you ask any of my friends growing up in Jersey City, when we played stickball, wiffle ball, I would say, okay, I'm the Reds today. And I would just go through the lineup, and it would be Bobby Tolan, Joe Morgan, or Pete Rose. So I loved baseball from the time I was 4, 5, 6 years old.
Well, let me ask a couple more basic Jersey questions for you, being a Jersey kid. What is the best diner in New Jersey?
I love this question. So I would go with, I'm a Hudson County guy, obviously. The one that I frequented the most was the Coach House right on Kennedy Boulevard in North Bergen, New Jersey. So I have a lot of fond memories of that place after some nights out, spending some time there. So I'm not sure it's the best, but it's the one that's most familiar to me, and it's very good. Still there, still doing good stuff.
I should say, as far as the answer to the question, that is definitely wrong. The correct answer is the Ridge Diner in Park Ridge, New Jersey. Another place where I may have also, like yourself, gone there at various times of the day and night, depending on what was going on, but we're not going to go into that.
So, Brendan, you're making me feel bad because the diner we go to the most, my wife and I now, is the Ridge Diner. I live about 10 minutes away from there. So I went with my heart. I went with what I used to do when I was a youngster. But within the last couple of weeks, I have ordered the turkey platter from the Ridge Diner and relived Thanksgiving at my home. So, yes, that's a solid choice.
We could do a whole podcast on Jersey diners, but we only have a certain amount of time. Next question, just for the background, Taylor ham or pork roll?
Taylor ham. I'm a North Jersey guy. It's Taylor ham.
Okay, I want to get into this, the 1998 Yankees. I love this book, of course, being a rabid Yankee fan from birth. And it was really nice to read, Jack, because it was, besides a good book, it's pure nostalgia for me. There was all sorts of stuff, especially when you grow up a fan. There was all sorts of events in this that I forgot was this season. Sometimes you think, oh, that happened in like 99, 2000, things like that. Whereas this was just pure nostalgia bait. Besides the fact that we're coming up on the 25th anniversary, what made you say, hey, I'm going to make this a book. This needs to be a book that I got to write?
The nostalgia was a big part of it. The anniversary was a big part of it. But Brendan, I had done a hitting book with Paul O'Neill. I had done a pitching book with David Cohn. And when my editor, Sean Desmond, brought up the 98 Yankees, it was his idea. I didn't have to think more than 30 seconds. I felt like that was right in my wheelhouse. I had been around this team. I knew all of those players. In my books with Cohn and O'Neill, I had already essentially interviewed them about the 98 Yankees. I knew I could get all these guys to do interviews with me. So it was a pretty easy sell. And you also, Brendan, you want to write books that people feel passionate about. And what you just said is part of the reason why I wrote this book. I know there's a legion of Yankee fans out there that if you say 1998 Yankees, It's going to bring an immediate smile to their face. So all of those factors contributed to why I wanted to do it.
So for a lot of Yankee fans, it's like you came out of the ether, you're on Yes, we all love you. But I mean, you were writing for the Times before this and everything like that. From a writer's perspective, how do you keep this from just being a recitation of facts, right? It's easy to just write, here's what happened. For you, how do you want to write that to kind of keep it interesting? And maybe somebody who doesn't know about this team is going to say, I'm going to give this a shot.
That's a great question, because it could be what I think in the industry is known as a cut and paste job. Just read a bunch of box scores and game stories and go back and refresh everybody's memory about, oh, they were 16-8 at this point in the season. So what I tried to do is absolutely dig deeper than that. And in the interviews I did, I was not so much focused on game action. You said you've read the book, which I appreciate. I don't really do play-by-play or dig really deep into games until I get to the ALCS and the World Series. When you have a small amount of games, that's when I really dug deep on the games. Before that, it was more about the personalities, the team gelling together, Torrey calling a team meeting early in the season in Seattle, Torrey and Wells not getting along, and how Cone came in as an intermediary. So it was taking those stories and digging deeper on them and not worrying about the play-by-play.
Well, I knew you were really going to do a job kind of writing this as a story. In the beginning, you say something that even for diehard Yankee fans may not be totally in the front of their mind when they think about this. This team became what it was because of how 1997 ended. Can you just expound on that a little bit? How did the drive that we saw from the 1998 Yankees start?
Brandon, I've been in a lot of losing clubhouses, and a lot of great writers will tell you that the better stories come out of the losing clubhouses. But that 97 clubhouse for the Yankees in Cleveland always resonated with me about how much agony and how much despair was there. They won in 96, probably surprised a lot of people. I think the Braves were clearly the favorite in that 96 World Series. And then I think the Yankees thought they were on this magic carpet ride, and they were destined to win it again in 97. And they actually thought the 97 team was better. When that doesn't happen, Brandon, I think that's an absolute slap in the face. And the way they lost, Mariano blowing a save in Game 4, and we all know about O'Neill's double with 2 outs in the final inning. Bernie makes the last out. I think those guys were so morose that they carried that into next year, and they were driven and committed to make up for what they didn't get in 97. So many players told me that. Torrey told me that it was a no-brainer for me to write about 97, because I'm not sure 98 happens in this form without 97. By that, I mean, if they had advanced deeper in 97 and eventually lost, could they have still won the World Series in 98? Yeah, but maybe they wouldn't have won 125 games. I think that team came back in 98 on a mission.
And the perfect microcosm of what you're saying is Bernie Williams. For anybody who watched Bernie Williams, he was a sphinx. He barely talked, didn't get in trouble, just came in. He was the consummate professional. But 97 crushed him. Not hitting, getting that hit when they needed it. Is he kind of the perfect microcosm of we should have had this and we didn't, and now no excuses, we got to pull together on this?
You said it perfectly, and I wish I had stolen your Sphinx line. That's perfect. That does describe Bernie well. I interviewed him a few times regarding the 98 season, and Brandon, you could sense his absolute despair reflecting on 97, because he knows if he gets a hit there off Mesa, Yankees tie the game, maybe they win the series, maybe they advance, maybe they do win another World Series in 97. So he talked about how committed he was to making sure if he was ever in that situation again, that he wouldn't fail. Now there's a lot that you can dissect in that comment. Bernie's only one player. Everybody has to contribute to get them back to the postseason. But I do think, Brendan, that this team had that sort of drive. And Tino Martinez told me something very interesting for the book about it being the only team he's ever been on where there's nobody lounging on the couches in the clubhouse. Everybody was doing something. Everybody had work to do. And I think that is another microcosm of this team.
Another piece that cannot be overstated is Joe Torre. And when I think back to Joe Torre, I honestly don't think a lot about in-game stuff that he did. What seemed to make Torre perfect for this team is They were professionals and they wanted to play the game. And Torrey was the perfect manager to keep everything else out of the clubhouse. Even nowadays, if there's a problem in the clubhouse, something's going to kind of leak out. It seemed like with Torrey's teams, no one was going to hear anything. He was going to let the guys play, and everything else was just going to roll right off their back because he kept it away from them. Is that just something from the outside, or did you see that on the inside too?
No, I think you're right, except for one thing that we've already talked about. He did criticize Wells to the media when he talked about Wells maybe being out of shape, his conditioning, if it's a factor in the heat. That was the one time where Joe said something to the media where I don't think he said it to the player first. But for the most part, Joe was the soothing, stoic leader who, when he did finally raise his voice, players took notice. Because for the most part, he was a player's manager. He had been through the walk that they were walking right now. He knew what it was like to succeed. He knew what it was like to fail. And I thought it was important, Brendan, at the beginning of the 98 season, the first thing he said to the team was, "We've got unfinished business." And Jorge Posada told me, I knew that. I had lived that. But when Joe said it, it jolted Posada. Okay, let's go. Let's go finish this off. He's right. We've got a season ahead of us to make sure that we don't stumble again.
Now, we're going to talk about Wells and Cone because there's gold there. But first things first, reading the book, and then I'm just going to name drop my favorite Yankees blog, which is Pinstripe Alley. They're doing kind of a retrospective as well. You forget they were terrible right out of the gate.
Yeah.
This team that went on to win just an amazing number of games, they were pretty terrible the first few weeks. And I know you talked about these closed-door meetings. Was it anger or was it panic during their first few weeks of the season?
I don't think it was panic. Torrey was never a panicky type manager, and I don't think any of the players were panicking. I think Torrey was frustrated. I think he knew how good this team was, and they start off 0-3 and 1-4. He calls a team meeting in Seattle. He tells them that he's not happy with their play. They were sluggish. Cone was a big voice in that meeting. He opened up the floor to the clubhouse. Cone talked about finding a reason to hate the opponent and talked about how much he hated Seattle. And the other thing that hovered over them, Brendan, was George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner was a demanding owner. He could be impulsive. They loved playing for Joe Torre. Don't turn this into a situation akin to what happened with Yogi Berra in '85 when they started out 6-10 and Yogi Berra got fired. So I think there was a lot going on there, and they ended up turning it around so that never happened.
I'm not going to say too much, but I do miss the boss. I'm just going to say that out loud. I'm just going to ask this question straight up. Is David Cone and David Wells the best bromance in baseball that you've ever seen?
Wow. I've never thought about it. That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another one that I've covered. Derek Jeter and Jorge Posada were really close. O'Neill and Joe Girardi were really close. But who Cone and Wells were and the stories that you get out of that probably does put them ahead of the couple of guys that I just mentioned right now. Cone was the ultimate teammate. I think Cone recognized that Wells needed a friend. They were already friendly. They had been teammates on the Toronto Blue Jays, but I think Cone recognized how important Wells was to what the Yankees were trying to do. I think he understood that he and Torrey were never going to get along to the extent that they probably should. And if he could swoop in there and be an intermediary, it would help both sides. And what a shrewd move by Cone, because once he and Wells started doing their own thing, staying apart from the team on the road, they were two of the best pitchers in the American League. They finished third and fourth in the Cy Young Award voting.
What I really love about David Cone, especially today, now that he's, doing announcing and things like that, I always feel like he's 1 second away from telling a totally inappropriate story. I think he could have the entire league put in jail if he started to talk about the things that he's seen. I'm just going to say that out loud.
Coney is the best. I mean, I had the great opportunity of writing a book with him. We wrote a 400-page book. We could have wrote a second 400-page book. There's so much that he knows. Some of it can be on the record. Some of it has to be off the record. But I'm pretty jaded in doing this, Brendan. I'm going to be honest. I go to work every day, and I love what I do. But I don't want to say that the excitement level rises to what it may rise to for a fan. But I'm writing the book with Cone, and I know I've got to write about the perfect game, but I'm saving that towards the end because I said, well, of course we're going to write about the perfect game, but let me get a lot of other stuff done first. And I was struggling with what to do about his perfect game. And then my wife, of course, the smartest person in the relationship, says, why don't you have David come to our house and you guys watch his perfect game? Why I didn't think of that, I don't know. But Brendan, he shows up to watch the perfect game, and this gets even better because we're sitting down to watch it, and he says to me, I've never done this before. I said, you've never done what? He said, I've never watched the whole game before. I said, well, now I got a chapter. The guy who threw a perfect game 20 years ago has never sat and watched the entire thing. So we watched it. He graded and evaluated every at-bat. And I have to tell you, Brendan, as we got to about the seventh inning, I'm sitting on the edge of my chair. You're nervous. You're watching this with the guy who was pursuing perfection. And I could tell he was getting nervous all over again. So in all of my years of reporting, if you asked me for top 10 moments, that would be a top 10 moment, that I watched a perfect game with a guy who threw one 20 years later and he had never watched it before.
And related to Cone, the revelation in the book for me, which I did not realize, everything else like you mentioned, I'm like, oh, I kind of remember that. I did not realize that the Wells-Torrey relationship was that bad and how much Cone really had to intervene in that in a lot of ways. And it was really interesting because Torrey basically, I'm going to say, pawns Wells off on Cone and says, just deal with him. Deal with him, make sure he shows up every fifth day and throws the ball. And Cone just had to come up with these ingenious ways to kind of keep the two of them on the same level. Was this something that was well known back in the day? Like, you can't put them in the same room? Or did they really keep this under wraps?
It was known that they clashed, that Wells and Torrey clashed. Was it known that Cone swooped in and played chaperone and be my best friend with Wells and basically kept him away from Torrey? No. I didn't know that, Brendan, until I wrote a book with David 4 years ago. I think we were the first to tell the story of them staying on the road when the team went to a specific city. Wells and Cone would go get their own hotel rooms, and David was and is so smart. Cone, not that Wells isn't. But what Cone was doing is he was getting Wells out of the crosshairs. He's getting him out of the team hotel where maybe there was a curfew, although I don't know how closely they check that stuff anymore, but he didn't have to run into a coach or Torrey or a teammate coming home late, going to the coffee shop, going to the gift shop, whatever you were doing. And it also made Wells feel like a rebel, which Wells wanted to feel like. That chapter was one of my favorite chapters to write. And I also love the chapter title, Rebel Without a Pause, because that's who Wells was. He was a rebel and he was unfiltered. But yeah, Cone deserves a ton of credit for the way he handled that situation. And I think if you took a poll of those Yankee players and asked them who's the most popular player on the team or who's your favorite guy on the team in 98, Cone would win that poll easily.
Before you started writing this book, if somebody says 1998 Yankees, is there one thing that immediately pops in your head about that team that you remember?
My thing, because I was there, is more of a scene. I remember the scene in the 98 winning clubhouse in San Diego because I've never witnessed more joy/relief. They were celebrating, but a big part of that celebration was the absolute relief that they had won, because you did not want to be the 114 win regular season team that didn't complete the deal. So beyond an El Duque or a Shane Spencer or a Brocious or Wells's perfect game, my mind goes right to that clubhouse in San Diego.
So a little bit more on Brocious. He kind of comes out of nowhere. It was very interesting because everything we've set up until this point, right? You talk about these high-functioning teams. A lot of times a player like Brocious would get, quite frankly, thrown under the bus. He comes in new, he doesn't have a lot behind him, and he has to immediately be very, very good. But especially the way you wrote this, he seems to just kind of come into the clubhouse and he's taken care of. Like, this team wasn't a kill or be killed type of situation. It was, we're a team, pull everybody in, and we're all going in the same direction. Is that kind of a way to look at it?
Absolutely. I think that the Yankees were aware of how good a defensive player Brocious was. He had just hit 200 in Oakland, but I don't think with their lineup, they were worried about offense from him. They were hopeful that he could play third base, play it adequately, give them some offense. And we talk about Joe Torre's smarts as a manager. He told Louis Soho, who was a backup infielder, you're not going to play in April, so stay active. And Soho said, what do you mean I'm not going to play in April? He said, Knobloch, Tino, and Jeter are all probably going to play about 150 games. And I need to see what Brocious is all about, so he's going to play every day. To Joe's credit, whether Brocious knew this or not, Joe elevated Brocious to who Tino, Jeter, and Knobloch were. They were better players at that point. I know Jeter's only in his third season, but he's the shortstop for the Yankees. I think he makes Brocious, as you just said, feel part of it right away, and he gets immediate dividends from Brocious. And Brocious ends up playing more than anybody on the Yankees that year. He played more innings than any player. That was a brilliant move by Joe Torre to just play him every day, every day, every day.
Now, when you first started writing this, was there anything you didn't know that you unearthed researching this that you just had no idea about? Or were you completely read in on basically everything that you ended up writing about?
I don't know that I would say that I knew every last tidbit. I thought Cashman gave me some really interesting stuff about his own situation and the back and forth with George when George hires him as the general manager. I thought the pursuit of El Duque was interesting, and how Cashman had a previous interaction with Joe Cubas, El Duque's agent, that Cashman thinks helped the Yankees in their pursuit of El Duque. Shane Spencer is kind of angry at the Yankees. Despite his great 98, he thought that he should have been in the major leagues sooner. So even 25 years later, there's some raw emotions from him. He respects the Yankees and loves being a part of the organization, but he thought that he had gotten passed over a few times. And I love Jeter's honesty. I know Jeter had the reputation, deserved, for being someone who was a very cautious interviewee when he was a player. This is the best team ever. And I know you can't compare generations, but I think we were the best team ever. We wanted to pummel teams. We wanted to beat you in every inning. I thought Jeter was very open and reflective in this book.
Jack, you're reading my mind. It was literally the next question, which something else that comes out. Watching Jeter, Saint Jeter, whatever you want to call him, he was a terrible interview. I know you can't. He was well, we're just going to come out tomorrow, trying to put the bat on the ball, get some good at bats and stuff. And that's what you needed to be, right? When you're the future captain of the Yankees at that point, like, that's the right thing to do. It's what Aaron Judge does right now. Whereas your quotes from Jeter in this, it's just a whole different side of him. Did you guys always see that? It was just like, hey, this one's off the record and let me tell you how wonderful we are? Or is it Jeter retired and said, ooh, I can say whatever I want now?
I think it's more of the latter. I think it's more of Jeter retired. I wrote a book with Jeter, and even when I wrote that book, and I had to tell him, it's your book, Derek. This book is going to reflect you. There were some things at that moment he just didn't want to talk about because he was still playing. I think now that his career is over, he's retired, he's comfortable. Yeah, man, he's pretty proud of that career. So he's going to let you know how he was feeling. There's also a great anecdote in this book involving Jeter and Darren Holmes, who was a new pitcher for the Yankees. And he observed Jeter going into the clubhouse every day and barking out a number. 157 guys, 152 guys, 148 guys. And he didn't know what that number meant. So one day he finally asked O'Neill, what is Jeter doing? What does that number signify? And O'Neill told Jeter, he's telling us how many more games we have to play before we win a World Series. I mean, talk about confidence. Talk about a guy who not only had done the math, but was letting everybody know, this is what we have left. Now, Darren Holmes remembers that specifically, succinctly, vividly. When I asked Derek about it, he kind of got a little smile and said, did anybody else tell you that? I said, no, Holmes told me, and he said O'Neill said it, so O'Neill verified it too. And Jeter kind of gave me a shrug of the shoulders, like, maybe I did it. I'm not exactly sure. I believe Darren Holmes. I believe Jeter absolutely did that.
I want to talk about somebody else on this team who seems to be a different person post-retirement. If you watch Paul O'Neill play on the Yankees, you would think that he is a raging psychopath. Nobody got angrier about getting out than Paul O'Neill. And I remember the first game where he was announcing, and I went, that sounds like Paul O'Neill, but he sounds like a super nice and kind of put together person who might not go off and start punching people in the face. And it turns out it was Paul O'Neill. From the inside, Was Paul always kind of that guy and you knew, he just gets angry about at bats and then he comes back and he's good to go? Or was he always intense while he was playing?
Always intense. Always intense. When I wrote a book with him, he talked about how if he went 0 for 5, he would lie in bed at night and stare at the ceiling and think that 0 for 5 was going to become 0 for 20. He didn't have the turn the page mentality that Derek Jeter had. If Jeter went 0 for 5, he'd walk out of the clubhouse eating an ice cream cone and he'd be ready to play the next day. O'Neill was as intense as any player I've ever covered. He admits that, and he will tell you that everybody's wired differently. And for him to have been a successful player, that was the way he had to play. He had to treat every at-bat as if it was life and death. And that worked for him. That's what got O'Neill the success that he ended up having.
And I mean, there's so many people to go over, and we just unfortunately do not have time. I mean, I could spend an entire episode on Orlando Hernandez. Just that story is amazing. But if the Yankees and the Padres go 7 games, and the Yankees lose, are we even talking about them right now? Because, I mean, I remember there was a very, very good Seattle team a few years after this, but they didn't win it. And most people don't even remember it. Would that be the case with this Yankee team? If they lose in 7, is there even a book today right now?
No, you have to finish the deal. I'm glad you brought up that Mariners team. The 2001 Mariners won 116 games. And as you just said, how often do you hear about them? I was fortunate that Jeff Nelson, who pitched for the 98 Yankees and the 2001 Mariners, is someone that I interviewed. He said the same thing. He said, we didn't complete the deal. And if you don't finish the deal, you can't be one of the best teams ever. Statistically, there are some historians and some articles have been written about the 1906 Cubs being one of the best teams ever because of their winning percentage. They didn't win the World Series. To me, if you didn't win the World Series, you're eliminated. You can't be considered among the best teams of all time. So as great as the Yankees were, if the Padres did knock them out in 7 games, even if it went 15 innings and it was a bloop base hit, I don't think we're having this discussion, Brendan. I don't think I would have written this book.
Now, the right answer is the 1998 Yankees are the greatest team of all time. We know that. But for the sake of other people, let's pretend that there is an argument. And luckily, you love baseball, so you know all of them, right? If it's not the 1998 Yankees, what other teams could even possibly say they're the best ever?
A 1927 Yankees. I think a lot of historians have always latched on to the 27 Yankees, and they're murderers row. You've got Ruth, you've got Gehrig. I mean, that would be the first team that would come to mind for me. 1939 Yankees. They had the greatest run differential of anyone in baseball history. I picked up the book here as you and I are talking. I mentioned the 1976 Reds. They led the majors in runs per game. 5 of their starters hit over 300. Thing about them, though, is they were 11th in the majors in runs allowed. The Yankees led the majors in runs scored. They led the American League in fewest runs allowed. So there was the dominance that carried across every aspect of what they were doing. I think the 1929 A's are a team that get a lot of attention. They were 104 and 46. So those would be some of the teams that I would think are also in that conversation. I mentioned a bunch of others at the front because I know I said something along the lines of, I think the Yankees were the best team of all time, but that shouldn't prohibit you from thinking that your favorite team might have been the best team of all time. Because I know there are Mets fans who will throw the 86 Mets in there. I know the Red Sox fans will throw the 2018 Red Sox in there. You can throw them in there. They're not going to be high on the list, but you can put them in there.
Yeah, but these people are wrong, Jack. Like, I'm just going to call it like it is. I know you're in the media. You have to stay as agnostic as you can for the most part, but they're just wrong.
The book says greatest team of all time. There's nothing agnostic about that. I was as definitive as you could be.
The number that sticks out to me, just to get a little baseball nerdy on you, is the run differential. It was, I think, 305?
309.
309, which, you know, for anybody who doesn't follow this stuff, it's just a way to kind of look at how much do you give up and how much do you score. And that number is ridiculous because it also shows you what everyone else is doing. And they just blew everyone out of the water. This singular thing I remember is Tino's home run in the playoffs. Goes up, and maybe I'm making it up in my head, but I remember in the book, it seemed like it went into the third deck. It just felt like it. There was multiple times watching this team in the playoffs where they fell behind and there was a confidence, even as a fan, that they're going to come back. They could be down by 7, but guess what? There's still 4 or 5 innings left. Like, this game is not over. You have to watch till the final out because it seemed like they were never down and out.
I would agree with you. Their lineup was relentless, and you're right about the Tino home run. Your memory is 100% accurate. It's interesting when you think about what they did in game 1, and obviously Tino's grand slam gets a ton of attention. Chuck Knobloch hit a 3-run homer right before that. Bochy pulled Kevin Brown, which surprised Knobloch, brings in Donnie Wall, and Knobloch takes Wall deep. So 10 days after Tino and Knobloch were involved in that ALCS bunt gaffe involving Travis Fryman, where Knobloch doesn't chase the ball down, they're the 2 guys who hit home runs that propel the Yankees to that win. And if you didn't think there was a ton of redemption and just a ton of positive vibes for the Yankees in that, then you weren't paying attention, because I'm not saying they won the World Series after Tino's grand slam, but they let you know it was going to be a short series. Padres were not beating them 4 times.
And just to prove I'm not just a complete Yankees homer, the World Series that kind of was sad for me is that Tony Gwynn's on the Padres. He's a bit later in his career. And I remember just thinking, like, everyone knew, if you knew baseball at all, everyone loved him. He was a great guy, an amazing player. And there was just a part of me that's kind of like, I wish we could actually just trade for him right now so he can get the ring. I think he deserves it, but I'm sorry, you're about to get steamrolled because you're on the Padres.
And Gwynn had a great series. Gwynn played really well. He had a funny line, though, a Fox interview before the series started. He said that the Yankees were a number 1. If you're using an NCAA hoops analogy, the Yankees were a number 1 seed. And he said they were more like a 48th seed or a 64th seed. And the way the series played out, he wasn't too far off. I mean, the Yankees swept them in those 4 games. The one chance that the Padres had, they got their future Hall of Fame closer on the mound, and Brocious takes them deep. So the Yankees just relentless. That's the word that I keep coming back to, just relentless.
So, Jack, the book's fantastic. Everyone should read it. But we do know that there are people out there that, this is history. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't read nonfiction, I don't read history, or I don't read baseball. Right now, we can't fix these people necessarily. But if I sat that person in front of you right now and they said, this usually isn't my bag, man, why should I read your book? What would you say to them?
I would say that you don't have to love baseball to love this book, but if you love examples of leadership, if you love examples of sacrifice, examples of camaraderie, chemistry, celebration, joy, how pain can lead to success, I think all those things are in this book. It's a baseball story, but it's a story that includes all of those elements as well. And there are fascinating characters. El Duque is one of the most fascinating people I've ever covered in baseball. There are heroes in this book. I think David Cohn's a hero. You and I have already talked about that. I think Joe Torre's a hero. You used it before. There are mythological characters like George Steinbrenner. And I just think there are lessons. There are lessons throughout this book about it's okay to want to be really, really successful. I think sometimes we live in a society where it's everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a lollipop. That's not the way the world works. There's going to be one lollipop at the end of the World Series, and the Yankees got it, not the Padres.
I would say one more thing I would add to this is, and you could make it a subtitle of the book if you do a few other runs of it, is David Cohn teaches you how to stay out of jail.
I like it. I'm going to tell Coney you said that. He'll get a kick out of that.
Appreciate that. Jack, this has been an absolute thrill for me. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Brendan. I enjoyed it.
And that's it for this episode. Jack, thank you so much for coming on. Head on out and buy his book, The 1998 Yankees. It's more than just about baseball. Everyone should read it. I mean, maybe not if you're a Red Sox fan, but that's your problem, not mine. In the meantime, nerds, hit us up Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Listen to other episodes of the podcast. Please leave us comments. Leave us ratings and reviews. 5 stars, please. Really helps out the podcast. We will talk to you in 1 week. In the meantime, stay cool, nerds.